That this is using Sennelier Oil Pastels to paint a Nocturne scene. And a lot of us, the first question we have is, what is a Nocturne, right? So it goes back to the 19th century, and it was a term originally used in music for creating a composition of music that kind of gave us the feeling of nighttime. And James McNeill Whistler created a painting called Nocturne in Blue and Gold. Blue and gold. And that one is the first one that was using the word nocturne as an artistic word for visual art, for painting. Now that has been used frequently since, and it's becoming really popular again right now. A lot of the plein air events that I go to often have nocturne events. They'll go out on night painting events. So that's kind of reinvigorated my night painting exercises. And I'm really excited to share some of that with you. So without further ado, I'm going to move one of my cameras over my table here, turn it on, and it'll block my face a little bit, but that's okay because the fun stuff is on the table. So we'll pin that, and everybody should be able to see the tabletop from here. So with Nocturne, night painting is nothing new. A lot of us are familiar with Van Gogh, Starry Night. That's essentially a nocturne painting before nocturne paintings existed. And there we go. How's that? Okay. So a lot of people have been painting night images for a long time. And one of the things that really excites me about night images, being out in the nighttime, is that our eyes see things differently. We don't see the same amount of detail. We don't see the same amount of color. So it allows us to really simplify what we're painting. And with that, I'll talk a little bit, for those of you who got the sample kit, we'll talk a little bit about what you got in your sample kit, and we'll dive right into that. So, of course, you got some Sennelier Oil Pastels. And it's not the brightest colors, of course, because it's a nighttime scene. So I'm going to show you what I would do with a limited palette just like this. You're going to have some samples of Fabriano Artistico paper there. And I really like the Artistico because it's got a soft surface. It really grabs the oil pastel. And there's a few different surface textures that you can choose from. I'll tell you which one I'm going to use as we get to that point. And then you have this image, which is very, very dark, of course. And I took this photo myself near my house here, just north of San Francisco, kind of pointed out towards the bay and the hills. But it grabs a little bit of detail in a foreground, a midground, and a background. So I'm really excited about playing with that image. And then, of course, a lot of you got a color chart. So the color chart is just for fun, just so you can see all the bright colors, the daytime colors that you can use in there as well. Great for portraits, still life, all that stuff. But with the dark image we're doing, we don't need quite all these colors, all these bright colors. And it's got a few details on the actual brand itself too, like Sennelier Oil Pastels being created for Picasso. So all that kind of historical stuff is really fun to hear about. And we can talk a little bit about it if you have questions. But I wanted to dive into some of the techniques right away, because I know that's the fun part. And oil pastels can often be a little intimidating, a little confusing. They're really sticky. People don't know if it's a painting tool or a drawing tool. So I wanted to address all that. Now, in your sample kit, you have our Fabriano Artistico. There's a rough surface that's really, really very rough. I don't know if it'll show that on the camera there. Then there's the cold press surface. This is a surface a lot of watercolorists will use. It's got a toothy surface, but not exaggeratedly so, like a rough surface. And then there's a soft press surface. And the soft press is unique to Fabriano. It's kind of a laid surface, a little more traditional. So that's the surface I'm going to use today. It's that soft press surface. And that soft press surface gives us the ability to kind of get a little bit of detail if we want it, but also we can keep it really loose. So what's the first thing that I'm going to do is take this color here that is Cinnabar Yellow Brown, which is a strange name, a very historical color, Cinnabar. But it's not a yellow, it's not a brown. It's actually kind of a green. greeny gold color. And I'm just gonna scumble this over the whole surface of the paper here. And I'm not being any too careful about it. Just gonna cover the whole paper. Now, on the supply list, I did add gloves, and I do, just to mention this, I do sometimes keep some, some rubber gloves around to keep my hands clean. It depends on how big the painting is, how careful I feel like being. Today, I'm probably not going to use the rubber gloves just because I want you guys to see with a little more detail, and the black gloves I have today would get in the way of that. So I also keep, some paper towels around. I can always wipe up a little bit, and I wash my hands definitely before I eat or drink or do anything that, might make a mess. So I've covered the paper in one quick coat, and I'm going to give it a second coat just for good measure. And we can see the oil pastels lasting quite a bit for the amount of pastel I'm putting down here. We're going to cover that whole sheet. And then if you have the sample kit, then you can use a paper towel. On the supply list, I mentioned Gamsol. Gamsol is just a solvent, a paint thinner that we can use if we want to brush this out. And the solvent will break down the wax and the oil in the oil pastel. But I'm just going to use a paper towel because that's what a lot of us have handy. We're going to keep it easy. I'm just going to burnish that into the surface. Rub it really good. You can see that it's really brightening up because this is a transparent color, so it's really good for glazing. And this is essentially a glazing effect that we get with oil pastels when we burnish it into the surface. And I want that color. It's not a nighttime color necessarily, but I really want that to be in the background because it creates this great glow. And then some areas where I know that that's gonna peek through. I'm gonna peel my oil pastel here a little bit, get the label off of it. And I know that I'm gonna want to see that glow in the middle tone here, or the middle area. So I'm gonna give it another quick layer there, just to make sure that it's gonna peek through really nice. Set that down. I'm gonna come back with my dirty paper towel here. I'm gonna burnish that in again. Rub it really good. So oil pastels are a little sticky, which is okay. They'll get less sticky over time, but they'll never really dry, which is a benefit because we can always go back in and paint with them more. I can pick this painting up 10 years from now, and I can scratch back into it or add some details. So if there's a painting you don't love, just file it away and pick it up later. Now, as a night scene, I'm going to look at my image here, and I'll use one of my oil pastels to make some notes on here. So we can see that I have a horizon line kind of here. I know that there's a little mountain back here just because I was there when the photo was taken, so I'm going to keep that in mind. And then we've got a light area kind of along here. So those are the details I want to keep in mind. Now I've also got another horizon line right here. You can see it's kind of a road. So I've got road marks, and we've got some bushes here. So I'm going to keep all of that in mind, just those really simple shapes, as I go in and I paint on the surface here. So reference image up. You guys may not be able to, or won't be able to see it, but you have your own. If you don't have the sample kit, take one little look at that. You can see it's 1, 2, 3 spaces, foreground, midground, background. So we have ground, midground, and sky. And then we've got those bushes in there. So we can really pick that out of our mind. We don't need to be using a photo reference, but the photo reference comes in handy. And it looks similar to how it looked the night that I was there. So I like taking pictures when I'm on site just as a reminder of the photos that I actually took myself. And it's good to take photos yourself because you see things that don't reflect well when the image is printed or when you're looking at it on your phone or your iPad. So you'll remember those things for later. All right.
Andrew.
So, yeah.
Bonnie has, okay, actually, we've got Nancy, Nancy, are you able to turn your camera on and show us? What Nancy is saying is that there are some bright green dots when they lay down the pastel. Any idea what causes that?
You know, I don't. I'd have to take a look at it. It could just be the way the paper's grabbing it. Oh,
I see. So Nancy, yeah, Nancy is showing it in the
go to that
on their screen.
Can you see them? It's almost like maybe the pastel just had other color on it.
Yeah.
That's
interesting.
It probably did. It could have had some of that blue on there from when we shipped it to you.
Okay.
So that could have been it right there. The blue and that are going to make some really bright greens. So I bet that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it's a different color, but it's probably just touched up against something. Okay.
All right, great.
No,
Thank
great,
you, Nancy.
great question.
All right, and then Bonnie has one too. If oil pastel doesn't ever dry, is there a fixative we can use on it to make it more permanent, and how should it be framed?
So traditionally, you know, it's been oil pastels were beginning to be, I'll start scumbling over this just as I answer that. I'm going to cover the whole sheet again in this with a light coat of this charcoal blue color, just really light coat. So the answer to that, if they don't ever dry, how do we treat the painting when we're done? And traditionally, you know, these were created in the 40s at the Sennelier store in Paris for Picasso, and they wanted to take that into account. So a lot of people treat it just like a pastel, and that's where it got its name, because it's not a pastel. You know, it's an oil pastel. It's very unique. But pastels needed to be framed under glass, and they were approximately the same size. So traditionally, since the 40s, which is, I guess, modernly, we would frame our work under glass, and that's the best way to protect it. But not all of us are going to frame everything right away. We might want to keep it in our studio. So there are oil pastel fixatives. Sennelier creates an oil pastel fixative. There's different things you can use over the surface of oil pastel, different varnishes. But those are going to be definitely the two ways to protect it, is to either fix it with make sure it works for oil pastels, or varnish it or frame it under glass. And if you're going to fix it or varnish it and you're not sure if it'll work for oil pastels, or you're not sure of the quality, I always recommend, you know, like today we're working on this small sheet of paper. It's something that we don't have to think of as necessarily precious. Save this painting that you're working on today as a test piece, and you can practice other things on it later, like if you need to varnish. So I always keep a test piece around in my studio just to test things out if I'm not sure if it's going to work, a varnish or mixing different media together. And then you'll see how it's going to interact before you put it on something that you're working on that's bigger or more important to you. So I gave it a quick coat of that dark charcoal blue, which really is just kind of giving us some atmosphere. So if we look back at that photo, we see that we have a uniform kind of darkness over the whole surface. And that's what I was doing right there. And then next, I'm going to take the same charcoal blue and I'm going to sketch in my image, just pushing a little harder, applying it more like a paint. So we can see we have our lower horizon line. And I'm not going all the way to the edge just for the sake of having something to put my fingers on, but feel free to go all the way to the edge. And then, like I said, I know we have a mountain back here that's kind of hidden in that darkness. So I'm going to draw that out even though we can't really see it. And then we're going to have our second horizon line here. It kind of indicates where that hill is. I'm going to peel off again. There's little perforations on here, which is really handy. They didn't used to have this. You can peel off a layer at a time to keep your fingers clean. And I need a little more pastel. And then I want the front is really dark, the lower portion of the painting. So I'm going to give it a good push and apply much more pressure. And you can see it's coming off on the paper like a paint, like a thick paint. And that's exactly what I want in this case. And it broke, but that's okay because the pastel works in smaller pieces too. So I'll just use that smaller chunk. You know, sometimes we get these from the store, they might already have a crack in them. That's okay. One pastel can be two pastels. All right, so I got my dark layer down there. I'm going to apply a second lighter layer to that mid-range, just trying to create some value differentiation. And then if we look at our image here in the top left, we can see it's much darker than it is down here in the bottom right of the sky portion. So I'm going to do some shading. I'm going to start up here in the top left, just kind of scumble or circle mark in some extra oil pastel in the top left and the very top, and leave that lower portion where we're going to use it for some light. Okay, I have the oil pastel on my finger. You see it's a little sticky. That's okay. Pop it there. I'm going to grab my paper towel, wipe my hand. It's all non-toxic colors, so as long as we're comfortable washing it off, it's not going to hurt you. Just don't eat it. Art supplies are never good to eat. Now that it's starting to look a little scribbly, a little dark, that's good. That's exactly where I want it at this point. So I'm going to look again at my image, and I see we have a nice light area where the sun must have gone over the horizon here. You know, I'm on the West Coast, so sun setting probably a couple hours ago, but it's still shining through a little bit right over here. So I'm going to take that area and I'm going to do that same kind of light hashing that we did earlier, being really liberal. I don't have to worry too much about how messy this gets, because essentially nocturne painting, we're making a judgment about what we're seeing. It's less light, less color, so we don't have to paint anything really photorealistic. We can make kind of guesses or best judgments for what's going to work for the composition. And what that is we're taking an impression, right? What's our impression of the landscape? So it's an impressionist painting, and that is a lot of the Nocturne style paintings were done by impressionists, and they wouldn't use black. So it's really nice that we have so many dark colors to be able to do this with. But so far you can see how much detail we're getting, and we're only using 3 colors so far. So we can start to use the lighter color to kind of sketch out some of those plant shapes we had along the road.
Andrew, after this, maybe you could just stop and give everybody a chance to catch up, make sure they're at the
That's a good idea.
Point. I think that would be great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. So while everybody is catching up, feel free to let me know how it's going for you. I'll just scribble over some of the stuff I've already done while we're talking here. We can talk a little bit more about some of the history of oil pastels. So Sennelier in the 40s, they have their shop in Paris. It opened in 1887. And Sennelier started making oil pastels in the 1940s. They had somebody come into the shop and say, you're a fantastic oil paint maker. We want a product that is like an oil paint, but like a crayon. We want it to be able to be used on paper, on metal, on canvas, on glass. And that person was Picasso. It was actually a friend of Picasso first, and then Picasso came in. But Henri Goetz was asking about this for Picasso. And so they created their first line of oil pastels. It was 50 colors, lots of blues and grays. And they wanted to create a crayon that Picasso could use that was archival. And the big challenge was using it on paper. So we all know that we can use oil paint, or we may know that we can use oil paint on canvas because canvas has been prepared, it's primed. But if we want to use oil paint on paper, as soon as we apply it, it'll create a halo effect right around the area we've been painting because it's leaching out the oil, it's sucking it out like a sponge. And with oil pastels, they said, how can we use something that's oil-based on paper without getting that effect where it sucks the oil out like a sponge? And so they decided they could utilize some mineral waxes and different pigments to saturate it. So the oil is still in there, but there's other things in there kind of containing that oil. And when we contain that oil, it prevents it from leaching out into the paper. And that's why it doesn't dry. So the same thing that we may sometimes find irritating, that it's not drying, is exactly what makes it useful on a surface Artistico that we're using today. So it's really exciting that we have a product that's so versatile. It can be used on anything. And I love that I can use it on paper. I work a lot on paper just because paper is easy to store. Paper has a really lovely nature to it, unique textures. You know, canvas, you're almost always going to have that same canvas texture, that laid weave texture, which is very uniform across the board. And that's great. A lot of people love that. But I like something that's a little less predictable, a little more natural. And I find that paper has that kind of sensuality to it. So how's everybody doing so far? Does anybody have any comments or questions before we go on to our next stage? All right.
I was just going to add that I like using tone paper with oil pastels. It really gives a nice, with these particular, these are my favorite product, everybody, by the way, and they have been for like 20 years. Butter is what I would use to describe them. So, but the tone paper, you know, in various shades can really bring out and make a big difference to your work too. As long as it has a tooth to it, I found that it works really well.
100%. And using a toned paper is a good way. You know, if you wanted to save a step in the process we've already been doing, toned paper would eliminate you having to put down that first layer. I just like the way it glows, but you could easily use, you know, a toned paper, yellow, green, blue, purple, whatever it's going to be, and use that with the sgraffito effects to show through the painting. And I use that word sgraffito knowing that it's not a common word. So we'll have to address that. So what is sgraffito? So I'm going to take my palette knife here, and that's on the supply list. You may not have one at home. It's not in the sample kit. But if you don't have a palette knife, if you have an old butter knife, a paper clip, anything around that might cause a scratching effect, I wouldn't use a butter knife that you're going to put back in your kitchen. But if you have an old butter knife or a plastic butter knife, or even a fingernail will work. Sgraffito is just the process of scratching into a surface to show something below it. So with this, I can take it and I can use the edge of my palette knife, and I'm holding it real close so I can control it. But I'm going to scratch back into the surface here. And you see I can get these drawn effects back into the paper, and this is where that yellow, golden, brown color comes back in for me. And then I'm just going to wipe that off. If we were blending in other areas, I could take that pastel and wipe it back in and use it. And I might do that in a little bit, but we're still in that beginning stage. So then I started sketching out these plants a little bit, and I can go back in and we're going to use this scratching tool. Like I said, paper clip, fingernail, butter knife, whatever you got around. You don't have to be too particular about this part of the process. Scratching back in, wipe it off. And that's a really good way to draw back into oil pastel. And
Love that. Looks great.
thank you.
So Bonnie had asked, you know, can you tone it yourself? And I think you answered that question by, you know, if you have a white paper, You can just lay down that base like you did to begin.
Base of oil pastel or a wash of ink or a wash of watercolor. So one of the cool things about oil pastels is that you can use them as a mixed media tool on almost any surface. But right now we're using watercolor paper. And so if you were to do a whole watercolor painting on your watercolor paper, or sketch with pencils or charcoal or anything else, you could finish that portion of it and then come back and do this on top of a finished drawing or painting in watercolor. Even acrylic, you can take this as a last layer on your acrylic painting and add in some details. You can get all these effects on a variety of surfaces and paintings. So I'm adding back in some of this dark blue around my bushes here, just because I carved out a little too much with my palette knife, and I want to darken it up anyway and cover up some of these textural marks from the paper and get it a little more painterly.
That's the rule, right, Andrew? Where you can put oil on top of pretty much anything. You just can't put other things on top of an oil-based product, right?
Right. So you could use this on top of anything. I wouldn't try and paint acrylic over this. You could paint oil paints into this because they're both oil products, but there's some rules there too that we'd have to talk about. Now, if you're doing watercolor, you could do this first and it would act as a resist for your watercolor. This one is the charcoal blue, by the way. It's that really dark blue. I really
You have the number on it. They're asking for the color number.
Oh yeah, this one is I smeared it off a little. It's either 235 or 236.
Great. Thank you.
235, I think. So the more I push, the more painterly I can get into that. Now I'll switch my blues just to vary it up a little bit, give us some more contrast here. I'm grabbing this cobalt blue, which is a number 4. And I'm going to start over here in this right-hand corner that's been neglected a little bit. And this one's a little brighter of a blue. So this is going to give, or it's a lot brighter of a blue, I should say. This one's going to give us a little more of that nighttime glowy skin. So I want to use this right around where I'm going to have that Naples yellow glow coming. You can see if you're pushing really hard, treating it more like a paint, that there's no problem with the amount of layers. You can keep painting in over and over. It's a wonderful medium for that, where a lot of pastelists will only be able to do just a few layers on paper. If they're using a soft pastel or a hard pastel, chalk pastel, whatever we want to call it. But with oil pastel, it is much more of a paint than a pastel. I'm just going to keep pushing that color in there. Try to fill some of these voids on my watercolor paper. I like a little bit peeking through, but cover up some of them. Then I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to use this glow down here on some of the bushes on the left-hand side, because that's where a lot of my shadow is happening. And then I'm actually going to take that Cinnabar yellow brown number 204 that we used for the background. And I'm going to push this into these plants. Use it as a way to kind of bring them forward, tying in that background color, but blending it with some of these blues we've been using. And I'm just using a circular motion. You can hash it, you can push it. I find that a circular motion with this, because it's a little sticky, it helps with the blending. And I'm covering up some of those scratchy marks that I made earlier. I can come back in and fine tune those if I want to. but I may not want to. We'll find out. All right, and then I'm going to take my Naples Yellow again because we want those light effects. And
Naples Yellow.
This one's the Naples Yellow number 21. I'm just going to scrub it back in here where I lost some of that detail.
Andrew, while you're doing that, can you help me from embarrassing myself and pronounce the name of the oil pastel fix?
D'Artagnan.
D'Artagnan. I never in a million years. Okay. So for some reason, folks, it's not on the website, but we do carry it in all the stores. So there is a specific fix for oil pastels that we do have. And I would give you a link, but just figured something out. Got to get that added.
Sorry, Tara. I should have thought to mention that earlier.
Oh, no, normally when you mention something that, is off the supply list, I'll just put a link in the chat. That way folks who are interested can take a look. And I was just surprised to find out that the other two Sennelier fixes are on the website, but not that one for some reason. So I will send an email.
Wonderful. All right, and now you can see I gummed up the tip of this a little bit, so I'm going to peel off 2 sections, and I have a break in this stick, so we'll see if I can hold it together. I'll hold it up real close to the front, but if it comes off again, no, it's going to come off, but I'm just going to hold it in my hand. That's perfectly fine with me. I don't mind getting a little messy. That's part of the fun of it. But if you want to wear gloves, or wrap it with a paper towel or a little piece of plastic wrap, or feel free to try and make it as clean as you can if you feel like you need to. A little soap and water always comes in handy later on in the day. And I'm just kind of fiddling, sketching down here in the front a little bit. And wipe my fingers a little. And then I'm going to pull out the charcoal blue again that I love so much. I'm going to push it around in the foreground again. Give us a little more depth up front. Let that come forward at us. I'm going to push real hard and get a lot of that oil pastel media down there. Pushing too hard, it's coming out the back. All right. There we go. And then I can even take a palette knife again, which is on the supply list. It's an RGM palette knife. Any palette knife will do. RGM is a great company out of Italy. And I'm just going to use it real gently, not scraping now, but just kind of rubbing, burnishing this front layer in. Treating it like I'm kind of painting with a palette knife, just pushing it in. Making sure that it's making a lot of contact with the paper there. Same way I would do with oil paint, acrylic paint. Making sure we get that. And the oil pastel, because we can treat it like a paint, we can get it so thick, we can really use any tool at our disposal. Like I was mentioning earlier, if you have Gamsol or solvent around, you can use your brushes with it. Get these different effects. You can use your fingers. But like I said, I'm already being messy enough, so we'll stick to the knife as much as we can. Wipe off my knife. And then we're going to grab our Naples Yellow. Now, you can see that the front of this has gotten pretty dirty. If I was going to throw this back in my pastel box at the end of the day, I would leave it dirty so that it kind of, that dirt protects the tip a little bit. But since I want to use it now and I want to use it clean, then I could just take a paper towel and just wipe it off real gently. Let's see, it gets pretty cleaned up pretty fast.
While you're doing that, Andrew, it seems like a good time to ask, actually, because I am really curious myself. Oil sticks get a skin on them. So if anybody's used oil sticks before, when they, you know, there's a skin that forms that you have to remove before you can use them. What's the difference between an oil stick and the oil pastels? That
Great question. And that comes up a lot, especially since Sennelier makes both and they can kind of look similar. We get a lot of people who confuse the two, and they do have very different working properties. So an oil stick is oil paint that's been formed into a stick with just enough wax to make it stay firm. So what that means is that it doesn't have those mineral oils that we talked about in here. So if I were to use the oil stick on paper, I would get that bleeding effect, that halo effect of oil. So oil sticks should only be used on surfaces you would use oil paint on. You can use them with oil paint. You can blend them with your oil paint, mix them with a palette knife, all that stuff. Oil pastels, they don't have that same oil content. They have the wax holding them. So they're just going to be able to be used on any surface. And you can't mix to the same degree that you would with an oil stick and an oil paint. If you were going to mix this with oil paint, you would not have binder in this portion, so you'd want to keep the oil paint at a really high ratio. So again, this can be used as a good tool beforehand, sketching, or afterwards, details on top of an oil painting, but I wouldn't want to mix a whole bunch of the two together. Some people do, and to good effects. That's just one of those things that you'd have to practice, try, kind of know the rules to break the rules. A very good question.
Thanks, that's awesome. And totally makes sense. Bonnie is making a very astute comment that I have said out loud multiple times myself, that that the oil pastels get eaten up quickly, and that that's true, because you're laying down, they so easily. That's the butter thing. I mean, to me anyway, Andrew, I'm sure there might be more to say about it, but when you're laying them down, they just lay down so easily and smoothly.
They do lay down really easily and really smoothly. But if I were to compare this with one of the ways we treat paint when we're trying to paint this thick, then I don't end up using as much as I originally assumed I would when I first started. So they can get eaten up quickly. It depends on the surface you're using. So a rougher paper is going to eat up more oil pastel than a smoother paper, but luckily they are quite affordable. They're relatively affordable as far as a medium goes. They're less expensive than paint. They're less expensive than soft pastels, and they can be used on anything. There's different sizes, all that stuff, but the smaller size, I find that I'd rather buy a couple of these because I can get that fine detail that I want. I can take it on the road with me or travel with me. So if I'm out next to the road actually painting this image, I can take these with me and not have to carry around a whole bunch of stuff.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
And then Marie is wondering if you're going to at some point show how to use the Gamsol with the brush.
I did have some Gamsol here. I wasn't going to use a brush with it. I can do that now, actually. Okay. I was actually going to take my paper towel here, my dirty paper towel, and I was just going to dip it in the Gamsol a little bit. And I was going to hold my painting down and just kind of buff this top layer. You can see it's really breaking down that oil pastel and pushing it into that surface. So this is a lot like how we started the painting, but I'm able to get it a little more fluid at this point. And it would be the same if I was using a brush. I just don't happen to be using a brush today. And of course, once we do that, it's still paintable. You know, that Gamsol is going to evaporate out of there. And then we can keep painting with the sticks right on top of that. And I can take my palette knife again and turn it on its side. We all know what it is. So and I am going to kind of follow this road mark that we had here. Just all the way down. You know, one of the things I like to do in my paintings is just create a big line all the way across it. Even when it's not representational, I don't know why. Something about that is very pleasing to me, having a big line across my paintings. And then I'll do the same thing, but in a thinner line up here. Hilltops. A little more loose. I'll scratch back in some of those lines that I took away on our plants. And you can see you don't have to use it just for outlines. Of course, you can actually use it to draw back into the painting, get different effects. And you can use a wide array of different palette knives, different mark making tools. Like I said, nails, fingernails, sticks, all that stuff that's available to us as artists. We can use all of it.
Clay tools work well too.
Oh, they do. Absolutely.
A lot of fun, different shapes.
Now, one thing that I glazed over a little bit, so to speak, is I have this line in the road down here. And I debated putting it in or not, because I don't know if we need it for the composition, but I'm gonna put it in real lightly here. Just scratch real lightly. Give a hint of it. And I know there's not a second line on the actual source image itself. I don't want people to get confused about what that is. So I'm going to give it a second one back here. That's good. Enough to give it kind of a sense of a road. And we're still working with just a handful of colors here, which is a lot of fun for me. I love working from just a few colors. Now on the supply list, we do have the bigger set, the set of 24. And it has a handful more colors. You can see I've used this before. But if I wanted to go in and add a little bit more color, a little bit more detail, this has got a great array of colors for me to do that. So I might add a few of those little touches right now, but you guys keep using those colors that we've already pulled out. If you have your sample kit, keep playing with those, and it'll make you think about the colors that you wish that you had a little bit of, right? So those 4 colors give us essentially a finished painting. I could stop right now and I'd be very happy with what we have. But I could add in a little detail just to give us hints of color. That's just going to help differentiate a few things. I'll take, it's a fun color, the violet ochre. Add in a little marks of shadow there. And then I can take the colors that we've been playing with, like the Cinnabar yellow brown. I can use that to kind of blend back into some of those little highlights that I just created. But that landscape set has a really nice array of colors in it. I can even take a little bit of white, just lightly run it along there. Pick up the chroma a little bit. And then I'll take my cobalt blue again, peel it back. Scratch back into this side here to kind of tie those 2 corners together. But I like, Tara, that you mentioned that it's like butter, because I like butter. But but I also
Doesn't.
I also equate it a lot to lipstick. So for those, those of us who picked up our mom's lipstick and decided to draw things on the mirror or the couch as kids, this kind of gives us back that childhood feeling. Hopefully not of getting in trouble, but of creating.
Maybe that's why I like them so much. I don't know. It's a very good comparison though, because extremely close. And I actually have a story that that along those lines, like all of our stores have amazing customers. And there was one in our Baltimore location. Now it's blanking on me, but she used to come in like once a week, walk up to the oil pastel rack, and before we would catch her, she would pick the prettiest color she could find and put it on as lipstick. Obviously that's not safe, but she really loved the color selection. So
that is a good story. Years ago, working in retail, I had somebody come in and ask about using these to paint for Halloween. They wanted to paint themselves as a skeleton.
oh,
They were going to put it all over their body.
it is not face paint or face paint sticks.
And you'll see, I mean, I'm getting a little bit on my hands and my fingertips here. It's not as easy to remove as a face paint either.
No.
So some of these colors, I'll wash them off, but I'll still have a little bit of staining on my fingers. I think that the person who asked me about that though ended up getting a latex bodysuit and then using these on that. But I don't know how she ended up keeping it fixed on there without rubbing off on everything.
Exactly what I was just thinking of. Interesting.
All right, and then so you see when I'm gently pushing on that, because that Gamsol's on there too, it helps slide around. It's starting to evaporate, but it's still there. But if I gently push, then I'm getting these greener colors from that charcoal blue, the cobalt blue, the Naples yellow. But then if I give it a good push, like really give it a good push, and the Naples yellow really comes out and get these great highlights. So I imagine when the sun's setting that it's back behind this hill over here. I don't know why, but I think that's where it would have been. A little bit more of a push there. It's okay to have a little texture on there. Doesn't have to be the smoothest thing, because you can put that fixative over it, or you can frame it under glass. Nobody's going to touch it. Now, the thing about oil pastels never drying, people ask if the fixative gets in there and dries it. It doesn't. It's not a drying fixative. What the fixative does is it creates a protective layer. So if I have this in my house or in my studio, Maud hasn't come to visit me yet, but my cats, they like to spend some time with me in the studio, and it'll get some cat fur in it, some dust, people drive by, we get that road dust. So all that stuff can settle in here and it stays a little sticky. So you don't want that to settle on there. So if I put this in a flat file, I'm not going to worry. But if I'm going to keep it out, then I'll want to give it that fixative. And the fixative doesn't dry the oil pastel. What it does is it creates a nice thin layer it's a vinyl based fixative, creates a nice thin layer of vinyl, and you'll never see it or know it's there. It doesn't add much gloss or anything like that. But I equate it to us having a cake in our house. If we have a cake, frosting, whole shebang, and we want to keep it for tomorrow, but we don't want flies or dust to get in it, we're going to wrap it in cellophane wrap or plastic wrap. And when we do that, it's protecting the cake. But if our 8-year-old nephew comes up and sticks his finger in it, the cellophane wrap is still going to push into the cake and you'll still have a finger mark. And it's the same for the oil pastel. You could put a fixative over it, it's going to protect it from everything. But if somebody walks up to it with a palette knife and scratches it, it's still going to make a mark. So just keep that in mind. A lot of people will use that fixative and say, well, it's still scratched, but it's not. It's supposed to. It's not a candy shell, coating. It's just to give it a little extra safety. Now I'm going to take my knife or scratching tool again. Just give some little hash marks here, just for fun, because I like doing it. Nocturnes are just so much fun. So I highly recommend if you get a chance to go outside at night and just think about taking some pictures, you'll see that once you start thinking about nighttime light in that way, that it changes the way you interact with the outdoors at night. Because a lot of us, we're just looking for the light spaces, right? We're looking for, if we're going to park in a parking lot, we want to park near the lights. Obviously, that's for safety. That's a good idea. But if you're going out to take pictures, you're looking for dark areas where you can see light from far away, waiting for your eyes to adjust a little bit. And you start to see that there's different value tones. So this is all going to be bright green in the daytime, with maybe some gold, some dry grass, things like that. But when we're looking at it from a nighttime perspective, we can add in, any colors we want because it's all value based. We can make it the most gaudy colors if we wanted to, and it would still be somewhat realistic from the impression we're getting from the impressionist standpoint. You could add a little brightness. Add in some midtones. But oil pastels are just wonderful for that. And they're travel friendly. So for any of you guys who fly places or go to visit family, go on long road trips, travel for work, this is something that fits in a suitcase real easy. I can tell you that I've put it in my carry-on bag and had no problems before. TSA might ask you what it is. You just tell them it's Artist Pastels and they let you go. So it's very travel friendly. And you can do these light little marks too with the oil pastels. We'll use some of this Naples Yellow again over here. I like that color. That's why I sent it to you. Got some little breaks in it, but that's okay. We're going to add some light down here in the road. Maybe there's a light pole over here. We want to get a little extra light. A little darker mark here. Or a harder mark, I should say, not darker. But I think one of the things when I was younger, I tried oil pastels and I just remember them being sticky and difficult to work with. And I really didn't like them at the time. And I think that's a big misnomer is we hear that word pastel and we think it's going to be like a chalk pastel. And it's important when we go to play with these that we know that they're kind of their own animal. And if we know that going into it and treat them more like a paint, then we're going to be able to control them a lot more, or at least accept the fact that we can't control them. All right, I'm going to grab some more of that charcoal blue that I love so much. I really do love that color. Fill in some spaces here. I started getting a little out of control. How's everybody doing on theirs? I see everybody's heads down, and I hope that means everybody's having fun, getting some marks down on the paper.
Everyone's so focused and working hard. Very
love it.
cool.
I can't wait to see what everybody's creating right now. And better yet, I can't wait to see what they create once everybody goes out and takes some photos, around your houses, your hometowns, your friends' houses, your family's houses. Because all these places, everybody's got nighttime. So in daytime, the light changes so fast. If you go at night, you might get some artificial light. You could see actually in this source image we have here, back in the left-hand corner a little bit, there's some lights kind of shining through the hills. And so we can take that into account. And at night when you're painting, this is going to stay the same lighting, right? Or almost, depends on if it's a full moon or not. But there might be some buildings back there with lights on in the middle of the night. And those lights are going to stay on. So you have more time to work on it. If you're out in the daytime, you're constantly fighting that light. It's going to change on you. You could take a photo like I've done here. But if you want to stay out and enjoy the, summer nights that are coming up, it's a little cooler out. You're not out in the sun. Get some more of those lights. There's some stars in the sky there. I don't have to be too particular about them. A little more gestural, bigger stars than what they're in the picture, but that's okay. One of the great things about oil pastel is the ability to erase. We don't think about erasing with oil pastel, but here, I don't like the fact that I added all these dots in, right? I know that I was mentioning that there were lights in the hills, but there weren't that many lights. So I can go back in with my knife and I can scrape it right back down to where we started. So I just, in essence, erase that whole area. And then I can go back in with those colors that we were playing with earlier. That charcoal blue. Get that back in there where it was, add it in, give it some good push. Blend it into those outside marks that we already have. And then we'll grab that cobalt blue and blend that back in there. We can erase all that and then bring it right back to where we thought we wanted it. I could scratch this whole painting right off the surface if I wanted and start over again. So oil pastels have a lot of forgiveness in them. Not to mention the amount of surfaces. We talked about that we could use them on metal, we could use them on glass. You could use them in a sketchbook, the little travel sketchbook, or you could use them in watercolor. Use them on canvas, you can use them on linen, use them on Bristol, whatever you want. Yupo, you can use it on plastic, you can use it on anything. Cardboard.
Andrew, let's say that somebody was going to grab a mixed media travel sketchbook and wanted to use oil pastels in their sketchbook. Would you put a piece of vellum over it? How would you manage a sketchbook with oil pastels?
Personally, I don't mind if there's a little transfer onto the back of the next sheet, so I wouldn't worry about it myself. But if somebody is concerned about that and they want to protect the back, then having a pad of vellum the same size is a great idea. I like that idea. Very good way to protect it. Pad of tracing paper the same size. Tear a sheet out.
Tracing paper would work too. Yeah,
that is a great idea.
Okay.
Some of the pads that are designed for oil pastels, they're usually just Bristol board or heavyweight mixed media paper, but some of them come with glassine in them. So you can use glassine, which is really just another form of tracing paper. just wax here. I know when I was in college, we'd buy rolls of wax paper at the grocery store, but that ended up being more expensive now than using a pad of vellum that's the same size as your drawing. So getting the pad of vellum when you go to pick out your pad is really nice. Plus you can use it for tracing. Get some image transfers going. So we've been working on this for a little over a half an hour. Is that right? A little
About
over
an hour, I think.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, you can see we've got what, dozens of layers on our pages now, and we can still keep working on it. I love that about oil pastels, that there's no limit to the amount of work you can put into something unless you say you're done. So it's just like a painting. You know, with colored pencils, you get to a point where you have to stop. With pastels, you get to a point where you have to stop because the material won't let you layer anymore. With oil pastels, it never tells you no. Just keeps working for you. Now I've probably overworked this one a little bit. And if you feel like you're done at this point, if you've been working on this with me the whole time and you feel like you're at a stopping point, that's okay. You can start experimenting a little bit with the materials. You know, I started working right away on the soft press paper. But for those of you with the sample kit, you also have your cold press and your rough paper. So you can, you know, start to experiment with those and see what kind of a mark you get, because they're all going to perform a little differently. You're going to get much more light shining through on the rough, a little more light shining through on that cold press surface. The soft press surface is really fun though. I like that surface. Don't feel like you have to keep going just because I'm going. You can always play with some other stuff, do some experiments. All right, let me grab some of that Cinnabar yellow brown color again that I love. And I'm going to start tying this in again. Some of these areas that need a little brightness. Ooh, that glows real nice. Because it's going to pull forward some of those marks that we scratched in. Give us some cohesiveness from the back. So Sennelier has been making these pastels since the 40s. How long does that make it? That makes it 80 years now. So there's still a new medium as far as, you know, humanity is concerned. So we can all be some of the first famous artists to use these. It's less than 100 years old. So in 500 years, they may look at our names and say, we were the first. And the Artistico has a nice history on it too, for those of you that like a little history. This Artistico is a part of the Fabriano paper line, and it is 100% cotton. So that's one of the other reasons I like it. It's really resilient, takes a beating. You know, if I'm scratching into stuff with a palette knife, I don't want a paper that I'm going to scratch right through. And the Artistico, I can scratch at it and not worry about tearing it. It'll take all that. And Fabriano has been making paper since 1264. So that's 758 years of practice. And I'm glad they got the practice because I use their paper a lot. Scratch back into some of these shrubs. I'm keeping it real loose. I don't want to get in the weeds.
So Andrew, Bonnie has a great question.
Yeah.
Bonnie's asking, if I used oil pastel on top of acrylic, how would I protect that from dirt since there are two mediums on my canvas?
You can still use the oil pastel fixative over other mediums as well. So I would recommend doing that, using the oil pastel fixative over the whole surface of your painting, even if it's an acrylic painting. The other thing that I'd note is, and this is a personal preference, so I highly recommend testing this on a scrap piece before doing it, because we all do it a little differently. Sometimes I'll use the oil pastel fixative and then I'll apply a varnish over the top, like a spray varnish that's made for oil painting. And the fixative gives me kind of a layer of protection on top of the oil pastel, and then the varnish gives me that harder coating like we talked about. It's a little more impervious to damage. So that's
Awesome.
always a possibility, but I highly recommend, because every varnish is different and every person's practice is a little different. I highly recommend testing that beforehand to make sure that it's going to work for the way that you work.
Thank you. That was a great response. And then Marie's asking what the erasing shield is used for.
You know, that is a great question. And I was searching for my erasing shield just minutes before we started this, and I cannot find it. So I will explain to you why I love having an erasing shield around for my oil pastels. But the erasing shield, if I want to have a hard edge, if I want to create a hard line, then I'll put the erasing shield down and use it as a stencil template. And I saw it from another artist on YouTube, was doing something similar. But I love the idea of having something really travel friendly, like an erasing shield, something really inexpensive that I can carry around, throw it inside my box of pastels, perhaps. I wish it was there. And then I can take that and draw my lines. If I wanted this road dash to be perfect, I could have put that stencil down there, the erasing shield, and drawn it out perfectly with one of the oil pastels. And it's just textured enough that it holds up in there.
Awesome. I just put a link in the chat for anybody that's curious. I mean, they're $1.49, and I think that I was really excited to see this on your supply list, Andrew, because I think when you're dealing with a product like oil pastels, that it's hard to get, like you said, a straight line, fine point. Like, let's say you wanted your stars to be perfect little circles or close to it. The erasing shield would give you that ability, whereas the plane.
Absolutely. Curves, straight lines. You could even use the outside of the erasing shield as a straight line template. But the erasing shield, I really love having it. And I'm going to click on the link after this and buy myself a handful, because I don't want to lose them again. Now I know I'm grabbing a couple colors out of that box that's on the supply list and not the sample box, but that's just to add in a little extra excitement here. But I could easily keep working, with just those 4 colors. I'm so happy with the amount of variation we can get, the amount of value we can get. So it shows that we don't really need to have, everything to be able to create some fun paintings. You can start with just a little and build from there. Now I know we're getting close to the end, and I want to keep painting and talking and hearing all the questions and comments you all have, but I also know that, Tara, we wanted to see if we had some time for people to show us their gallery view, right?
Yeah, we have time. We've got 14 more minutes, and that'll only take a minute. So
Okay,
I think
cool.
that if you have other techniques or, cool tools and tricks or tips and techniques for oil pastels, that you were talking about that you wanted to show folks while they're finishing up working on their own pieces, then I think that's a great idea.
Perfect. And we will just keep painting, keep playing. And of course, I'm overworking some stuff, so I'm going to use my knife and just keep burnishing. And I'm burnishing instead of scraping because I don't want to lose some of the color mixing that's already happened here. I could scrape it back down and then add back in those colors, but I don't want to have to do that when I can mix them into one layer here and then build on top of that. And then I'll take my paper towel, my Gamsol, dip just a little bit, not enough to touch my fingers. You don't want to get the solvent on your hands. This is one time I should be wearing the gloves. It's because I'm using the mineral spirits. And then I'm just going to blend that in there. I really like the shine that picks up when I'm burnishing this with the mineral spirits, because it doesn't seem to go dull on me as it dries. I don't like that spot. I'm going to rub it in. Take this here, draw some lines with it. Down. Soften this a bit. Amazing. I love working on the same painting, being able to scrub it away and come back to it. You know, I do take watercolors with me when I travel too. And with those, if I mess up too much, I have to scrap it and start from scratch. And I really like that with these, I can just scrub it down, go back into it. Getting a little bit of a matte effect there. Scratching at the surface. Back in. And then I can take charcoal blue. Back into it a bit. Build some of that color back in. Just getting a little more atmosphere. I'm going to drop out some of this line that I scratched in. Cover up a little bit of that. Still in there, just hidden behind that. So that's kind of the scumble that I just did is a little bit more like a glazing technique. I'm bringing this charcoal gray or charcoal blue color back in. And I had all that color down there, and I can just put this right on top of it. I'm not getting rid of that other color, just hiding it behind there. And that lets some of it peek through, give us a little bit more of a glazed effect. And because in our source image, if we remember, this whole side, when we looked at it, it's really dark. We can hardly see anything there. So I just want to kind of tie that back together and hide a little bit more of that. I was having fun adding that color in earlier, but now I realize it didn't exactly mimic the image that I was working from. So I'm going to hide it a little bit. I don't have to. You can keep it, keep the impression of what I had when I was there. Maybe I saw a little something that's not in the picture, and that's why I did it. Could just be from memory, but at the end of the day, I decided that we can hide it a little bit. Then I'll go back in, scratch out some lines just to give a hint of that memory. Here.
Andrew, we have another question about fixing mixed media.
Yeah.
So can I add oil pastels as highlights to a regular pastel painting? Again, if so, how would I protect it?
That is a tricky one. I would not recommend that. Again, have a test piece and try it. If it works for you, once we know the rules, we can all break the rules, right? With art, everybody broke a rule at some point, and that's how we got to where we are. Oil pastels were thought to be impossible when Picasso asked for them, but they found a way to make it happen, and they're great mixed media tools. So when we think of soft pastels, chalk pastels, or hard pastels, they're a dusty material, right? So it'll be difficult to get your oil pastels to stick to that dusty material. I'm not saying it's impossible. It might work for you depending on the technique, so you can try it. But in that case, figuring out how to fix it would be a little more difficult. So that's one instance when I would say, if you're putting it in storage, put a little piece of glassine over it. If you need to frame it behind glass, but I wouldn't necessarily put a fixative on that in that instance, just because a soft pastel fixative is going to have different working properties than an oil pastel fixative. And you'll lose something from either of those mediums if you try and use one or the other.
Perfect, thank you.
Of course. So I pushed this side back into the background again, but I lost a little something here. So I'm going to add that background color back in, that Cinnabar yellow brown. And you can hardly tell I'm adding it until, let's find it, until we go back in and we can add a little bit more of that Naples yellow. Treat that like our warm white. The Naples yellow is going to pull in some of that Cinnabar yellow brown, brighten it up for us. So I really like the idea of, I try and use cohesive colors. Even when I'm not working from a limited palette, I try and use the colors all over the image. And that helps tie things together. If I'm using that Cinnabar yellow brown in the background and I use a little bit in the foreground, it helps. A lot of my paintings are a little flat. I like them to be a little flat, a little more contemporary in that regard. But if I use a little bit in the foreground and in the background, it'll give me a little bit of that bounce, so my eye will view the whole painting. And I'll do the same thing like when we use that cobalt blue in the top right and in the bottom left, helps our eye kind of travel across that. And it's just one of the things I really like to do. So even if it has 100 colors in it, I'll pick a few of them and I'll make sure that it has it in different points throughout the image so that our eyes kind of capture that color and follow it through.
This has been awesome, Andrew. We really appreciate you being with us today. And, you know, it's just been like relaxing. I feel like I'm watching video, and you guys have been so quiet because you've been so focused with your questions. It's been really great. So we've got about 2 minutes. So whenever you want to come to a stopping point, we can do that gallery view. If anybody has any last minute questions they want to throw in the chat, now is the time.
I can't wait for the gallery view. So even though I want to keep painting, I'm going to make one more mark with a red, just because I haven't used a red yet very much. And I know it wasn't in our sample kit, but I want to give it a little punch here. Maybe a little bit of this pink color again. Kind of clay tone. Add in some of the lights. All right, and then I think we are at a stopping point, and I am gonna I'll leave the tabletop camera on, and we have my face camera on. So I think we're at a good point.
Awesome. All right, so if everybody wants to turn their camera on and then go into the upper right-hand corner of your screen and change it from speaker to gallery view, and we can all check out your work. Oh my gosh.
Oh man, that is fantastic.
Wow. You all rock this. Wow.
I love it. Amazing.
And it's my favorite thing about this part is knowing that you guys all had such a limited palette, seeing how different they all are. It's just so cool. So cool.
I can.
You should all be super proud of yourselves because it's amazing.
It is phenomenal. I love how different they all are.
Great job. All right, so I'm gonna go back. And please, if you share on social, use the hashtag create with Plaza Art. And we can wrap that up for today. I don't see any additional questions in the chat. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate that. And it's always great to spend time with you all. I hope to see you at the next one. Do you have any parting comments, Andrew?
I don't. Thank you all so much for having me. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Plaza. I'm really happy that that I was able to spend my day with you, and I look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. As always, it was a true pleasure, Andrew. Thank you so much. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.